asked me what was really wrong around on the Armed Forces tour, I said, a bad case of the sliced nose. I think that is a don't print that.
Wait a minute, what tour was that? That was...
The one the Columbus thing happened on. The last one we did before we came off the road.
Oh, that wasn't...
The one where we did the... No, the one after that. The one where we did the bad Berkeley show.
Oh, I just...
That somebody told me was the best show they'd ever seen last night. Yeah, that 40-minute show.
I saw that show.
Well...
I like the Warfield better, but that was a good show.
Warfield was fun. Oh, I tell you what. Just realised. I knew there was something I wanted to add.
Where's the Berkeley?
They especially imported Greek dust. It was horrendous. I mean, you couldn't breathe. Yeah, every number I had to take a drink because I was just choking.
It really looked great. It made the lighting.
The thing about natural is a natural kind of event. That's why it often looks best that way.
Like Kiss.
I thought it was really like Kiss, actually, with this. Oh, shit. That's all right there. Just I've split the bag. I'll have to try and borrow some kind of polythene bag or something.
On anytime?
Bye, everybody. Roll.
Oh, hi. Previously, you have maybe shied away from the media to some extent. Is there a change in attitude?
I think we're changing our attitude temporarily towards media because it's been a period of time since we started making records and since our last interviews, which was our introduction to the country. And things didn't fare too well with journalists in general, or in most places. They all seemed to get the wrong end of the stick, and it seemed to be doing us a disservice. So we just decided against doing any more interviews. But after a period of time, I think a certain amount of things need explanation so that you can get them out of the way and get on with the next, whatever the next project is, you know.
Well, the critics this time seem to be treating you very well. Anything about critics in general, or just how you feel about how the album is going down in this country?
Well, so far, the album's, the response to the album seems to be pretty reasonable. I mean, I haven't seen very many reviews or anything, but it seems to be quite favourable, with a few exceptions, like the Daily News in New York. And completely forgot what I was going to say. Let's start that one again.
Just ramble. I'm just asking how the response to the album is in this country. Is it what you expected? And maybe how the response to it is also in the rest of the world in comparison.
Well, the critical response to this album seems to be pretty good, and it was almost uniformly good in England, and so far it's been very good in this country. I don't really have any idea of how we're going to be received critically, or I don't really write for the critics as such. It's obviously quite pleasing if people see the things in the records that you put there, and I always hope that the people that buy the records see those things. So presumably critics are people. Some of them aren't. See, some of them are so much critics that they're not really listening as a regular person. They're listening self-consciously as a critic. Therefore, I feel that they strike preconceived poses before reviewing the record, so they don't always see the same things that the average listener would see. And maybe because they're saturated, you know. So I don't really pay that much attention to foolish critical poses, stances that some people take. The better critics seem to listen with their heart and their ears rather than, with their eye on this particular year's fashions or something. You know.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the new record. It is, as most of your records have been, you've made rock and roll records, you've made R&B flavored records, you've made a country record, and this one seems to be a songwriter's record, or at least the way that you've done the arrangements and the way your voices, you're getting the lyrics across to people. Can you talk about it a little bit?
Yes, I think on this record it was a conscious effort to take the beat out of to take the dominance of the beat out of the record a little bit, to bring the melody forward, and to make sure people could hear the words. On previous records we'd tended to go for the overall sound, and it was starting to frustrate me a little bit that some of the lyrical ideas are not getting over. I don't want to just sort of it be like one long lecture or anything. It's not like that. But it's the whole spirit of the last two records seemed to be lost on a few people because they had the preconceived idea that they were following on from maybe the first three records, which were very aggressive and didn't have, they maybe lacked a little bit of compassion. Maybe not as much as a lot of people thought, but that seemed to be that was the most worthwhile copy. When you're talking about a critical response to the first three records, was the Angry Young Man Syndrome, and the two. That was up to Armed Forces, and then with Get Happy and Trust, it was an attempt to bring a more obvious compassion into the music. But it seemed to be lost on a lot of people. At least that's the way if the critical response reflected people's opinion at all, that was the way it was. So it seemed important to maybe put the words out more nakedly and use the more tones in the voice to express it better than using necessarily a very fierce beat. You know. It tends to override everything, you know.
In your song Pigeon English, do I sense that you're in this country of the William Sapphire talking about language? Do I sense that you think the language is becoming a bit obscured?
Well, this is what, yes, not obscured. I think destroyed would be a better word. I think language is being destroyed, particularly by popular newspapers. Like in England, we've got like real comics that really just rely on catchphrases and emotive headlines and cute pictures of the royal family and dogs to just get to fill up their newspaper. There's no real substance to anything they write about. They use slang, but not as an effective form of shorthand, just as an excuse for not having to think properly, you know. And I think that there is an element of that in American press, but it's mostly in things like sensational papers like the National Enquirer and some of the grubbier kind of dailies. Daily News.
What do you think about, I'm going to skip around a little bit.
No.
I listen up too, so. What do you think about what's going on the radio here? I mean, are you anxious to have enormous hit records?
Not at the expense of sacrificing the sound of the record that we want to make. I mean, there is a temptation for us to just get Roy Thomas Baker or Mutt Lange to produce say our next album and make it sound exactly like FM and AM radio want us to sound, so that we'd fit in exactly with their programming along with Foreigner and Asia and those groups. And it might be an interesting exercise to maybe make one record like that to see what would happen if you pitted the content of our melodies and words against that sound. I mean, that when we made the Armed Forces record, it was an attempt to do just that with the sort of pseudo-ABBA production. But obviously, I think what was behind the intent behind it tended to overpower the production, on the better songs, and on the lesser songs, the production overpowered it. It would be nice if you could strike a balance and make a record that would, but once you've declared your intention, you can't be subversive about it. I mean, I remember reading an interview with Sting claiming, oh, well, we're a very subversive band, but the minute you declared yourself as subversive, you're not subversive anymore, you know. So that it's almost impossible for me to just suddenly start making FM-sounding records that would have any point to them. There, I would either be just selling myself short or just doing it for a joke.
You have written, although the record is a bit different than your other records, and as you say, the emphasis is not so much on the beat. When you perform live, you certainly still do lots of rock and roll. You like performing?
I like it a lot better than I used to, yeah. I think up to a point it was quite exciting just coming out and doing 40-minute shows where we just was one long continuous song, really. in very short breaks, and then after a while it got more of a strain to keep that, to focus on those songs, and there were other things creeping into the set which seemed to upset the momentum of that one continuous song idea. And it's only recently, now we've got enough material to formulate a much better pace set where we can slow things down but still keep control. Whereas ballads used to seem like an uncomfortable interruption unless it was a particular song that people really wanted to hear, like Alison from the first album, because Linda Ronstadt had recorded it, it had a popularity with the audience. Any other song, any other slow song that we tried to incorporate always seemed like time to go for a hot dog, you know, and it used to be a bit frustrating, but now people, the audience that have been at the first few shows here, seem to accept the fact that we have slow numbers and medium tempo numbers, and maybe we've got a little more confident about playing in a medium tempo that you can set up just as an effective rhythm in a medium tempo as in a furious one. In fact, furious rhythms are really hard to dance to. Most of the best dance records, in fact most of the best records are medium tempo. Even the ones that people think are great rock and roll records, there are very few great flat out rock and roll records. Lights Out by Jerry Byrne is probably one of the few really flat out rock and roll records that really make it. All the best ones are actually quite slow, like Satisfaction is really slow. And Anarchy in the UK is a really slow record, you know. And this is the you know, we tend to sometimes play some of our numbers too fast.
I have not noticed it on this tour as much as I had in the past. You brought up Linda Ronstadt. Can you talk just a little bit about people covering your songs, and maybe what I'm trying to get to is Almost Blue, who would be your ideal people to cover your songs, who you would like to write songs for?
Well, a lot of the people that I'd really like to hear sing my songs, or to write songs specifically for, are dead, or perhaps a little bit past their best, you know. There are still there are some covers of which I'm quite satisfied with, like Dave Evans' cover of Girls Talk, and there's a recent cover of an obscure song called Just a Memory by an English group called the Shaking Pyramids, which was, for them, it was a really unusual thing to do. They were a rockabilly group and they took a ballad and did that, and that's very satisfying to see that it sort of lent them the chance to do something completely out of their own style. It's quite satisfying to see. I believe Dusty Springfield is recording the same song on their next album. That's a sort of ambition fulfilled. Obviously recording a song with George Jones was an ambition fulfilled. And similarly, I'd love to hear Loretta Lynn sing a song if I could, you know, write one. There are lots of singers: Bonnie Raitt, Aretha Franklin, Frank Sinatra. But you know, it's very hard to get to a lot of those people, and a lot of them seem surrounded by advisors, producers, writers that don't really know the strengths of even these great singers.
You gave one of your melodies for this album to Sammy Kahn. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I had this piece that I wrote on the piano. I don't play the piano very well, but I'd sort of written this piece, and it didn't have an awful lot of obvious structure and didn't suggest any words. And my publisher asked me whether I had any particular ambitions with regard to songwriting that he could assist with. And I said, well, I've always wanted to write a tune for a Sammy Kahn lyric, because he's one of the last functioning lyricists from a sort of songwriting period pre sort of rock and roll. And I sent it to him, and he had it for a couple of months, and I think perhaps it didn't really have enough form to it at that time to make sense. And he sent it back saying that he didn't really see anything in it, which made me think about it, and I modified the music of it and then wrote the lyrics myself. It sort of became a bit of a challenge, I suppose.
And can you just throw in what song that ended up being?
Oh, that's the song Long Honeymoon.
Well, it's come up already in several reviews that I've seen. Do you aspire to be the Cole Porter of the 80s?
No, I don't think so, no. I don't want to be a homosexual cocaine fiend. Do I want to be the Cole Porter of the 80s? No, I think it's silly. That's like saying, do you want to be, you know, do you want to be Buddy Holly, or do you want to be anything that's gone past? No, I want to be me now. I think if there's anything that's lacking, maybe there's a substance of songwriting that the people pre-rock and roll that I admire, like Jerome Kern and Rodgers and Hart, Cole Porter and George Gershwin and lots of writers like that. It's just the substance of the quality of the songwriting, the precision of it. But it's not necessarily, it didn't just disappear when rock and roll came in. That's not to say that that rock and roll wasn't great when it started out. It's just, if you can compare early Elvis Presley or Little Richard with Van Halen, you see what rock and roll's become. But the continuation of the songwriting tradition that started with Jerome Kern, say, and went through George Gershwin and those people, was still carried on by Burt Bacharach. There's always somebody around doing it, you know. It's just, it's very easy to become very precious and pretentious about it, the way people regarded Jim Webb, who wrote a couple of good songs and suddenly was God because he could, you know, he discovered a diminished chord, you know, something.
Can you talk a little bit about the country record? I think people are still curious about that, how it came about.
What the hell we did it?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Almost Blue Earth was originally going to be it probably would have ended up a double album, so it would have been an even less profitable commercial prospect. My idea was to do a complete ballads album, incorporating some sort of standards, what we call standards, and some blues songs and some country songs. But I thought in the long run it might become a bit confusing, might become a bit like a Bobby Darin album, some of those albums which had a good intention, but there were so many different types of song on that it just became a sort of lounge style, a vague style. I wanted a more defined style that people could identify, and country music as one that's easily identified and abhorrent to some people, which was almost one of the reasons why I wanted to use it. And when we went to make the record, I wasn't entirely certain whether I was going to write the songs myself or whether we'd do covers. And when we arrived in Nashville, it seemed much more profitable to do covers. I don't think it would have been possible to record my songs there because there was next to no understanding between us and the producer, not with regard to original material. And he couldn't really understand why we wanted to record all this old material anyway, because he was sick to death of most of the songs. And I thought it was pretty unusual that we wanted to come to Nashville to record anyway. But I think it lent it a degree, it at least proved to people that it wasn't some kind of parody, which country music has often been in rock and roll. Sometimes quite effectively Commander Cody, that was good fun. But and they you know, Bill Kirshen, when he used to sing truck driving weepy ballads, it could break your heart. But there are other elements of country music. It's always been that slight joke. It's like a hippie joke, and I didn't want that element in there. I wanted to make sure people, it was, you know, we wanted to make a Charlie Rich record, you know. Title.
I ask about titles.
Oh, you definitely, yeah, because
yeah.
it's a good one.
Can you talk a little bit about other projects that you want to do and being a producer?
Yeah, I really want to. Being a producer, I don't know, I think I really fell into that. I think I was conned by Nick Lowe into thinking that you could do it quite easily. That filled on enough bottles of wine, you could probably pull it off. Now, Nick has this very carefree attitude to producing, which makes it look quite easy. And I think working with Roger Bashirian, who engineered the first 4 albums that we did, we worked up a good relationship that definitely worked on those records each time. And I became interested in doing something and did the Specials' first album, which was recorded in a very primitive kind of studio with a great engineer who went on to co-produce a second album, and had a lot of fun doing that. I wouldn't really claim to have any producer's knowledge. Like, I can do a little bit, I know a little bit of echo and know a few bluffers terms, and that you sort of listen to the engineer and say, oh yeah, that kind of, yes, EQ and things like that, kind of terms you use when you're talking, and sort of impress the band, you know, sort of like, yes, change the microphone over and sort of say a few things to make it look like you know what you're doing. But I think anybody, at least when I worked with Squeeze, I think they knew right away that I knew nothing about it technically, and it was more to do with sort of coaxing the good performance and just being the arbiter of the individual performance. The arrangements were pretty much formed. I made a few suggestions. I mean, the only song that I think I really shaped the arrangement of in any major way was possibly Tempted off East Side Story. Mainly because it was originally sung by Glenn, as it is now, and I believe in their live shows, and when Paul Carrack was in the group, it seemed to me to lend itself better to Paul's style of singing, and we did the vocal arrangement thing, which was, you know, which was a new thing for them. But the rest of the time, it was a pleasure to be working with somebody that can sing as well as Glenn Tilbrook. It was just a question of pushing him that little bit harder to get that little extra thing. He always sings great and always sings in tune. But it was just nice to get little nuances in the voice and maybe try and put a bit of edge in his voice to give it a slight bit more character, because it's so pure. He'd have to furiously smoke cigarettes all day just to put a little bit of edge in there to make it slightly more interesting. With Chris, who I think's got a great voice as well, although, you know, at his own admission he's not the world's greatest singer. He'd always done this low, barking, kind of yobby kind of singing, and I thought, well, the one song that he sang on that album, Someone Else's Heart, I really wanted him to sing in a softer voice, and with a little bit of effort and concentration on his pitching and everything, he came out with a really touching kind of vocal, which was much more gentle than anything he'd ever done before. And on their new album, I was pleased to see that he carried on, although I wasn't involved except singing a bit of backup singing on their new album. I was pleased to see that he carried on one of the songs singing in that style, because you know, you can. It's always a good thing to stretch your limitations, you know, which is really all I could do as a producer.
What was it about Squeeze, the attraction, your initial attraction for the music?
Well, I thought their songs were great, and I thought the ideas and the Cool for Cats and Argy Bargy albums were fantastic. I thought the production was awful, and it just was so flat and thin sounding. There wasn't enough variation from track to track. They were selling themselves really short. The songs didn't have any life as records. They had a full of life in terms of the words and music, but the production didn't have any life in it at all. It just sounded really flat to me, and I thought it needed more variation, more change it, you know, maybe just push them into other areas. And they were up for experimenting a little bit and trying to break away from this nice poppy, you know, and they were just written off like that for ages. And I noticed this really strange tendency since I arrived here. I read a really snide review in the LA Times of their show in the Greek Theatre in Los Angeles, where they said, oh, well, of course, they're not as good as they were when they were doing Argy Bargy, and that was when they were really good. And that's just, to get back to the critical thing, that's just typical of an adopted critical stance overriding reality, because nobody would give them the time of day when they were doing Argy Bargy, and now they're claiming that that was their main period, and that's complete rubbish, because nobody would listen to them then. They were just written off as a sort of lightweight joke, you know.
You obviously still work with them some. Didn't Chris write the words to one of your songs?
Yes, well, that actually stems back to around the time that we did East Side Story. I think I had the tune of Boy With a Problem at that time, and I had no words for it. It didn't necessarily suggest anything, and I said, would Chris try and write something just to sort of experiment to see what it came out like? And he's much more of a craftsman when it comes to lyrics than I am, because he's used to writing with Glenn and having to fit the words to a pre-written tune. He's perhaps better at that, whereas when I write myself, it all happens all at once, and I occasionally have a finished tune and then write words, but more often the two things happen more simultaneously. So he fitted this lyric to it. I had the title, and he just wrote from the title, and the title and the music obviously suggested the general mood, but he came up with the story, and I just changed a few lines and added a few lines where I thought it needed maybe a little bit more emphasis.
Does writing come fast for you? Do you find it takes a long time, or does it vary from...
It varies, it varies. You know, sometimes I'll write like 4 songs in a week and then won't write anything for a month. Other times I'll go through a period where I'm writing constantly, but not necessarily anything of any use for you know, the things that just be quite slight songs which I might finish and then discard and use bits of later in other songs. It's a very confused process. There's no pattern to it. I don't sit down in a room and say, I'm now going to write songs. I don't seem to be able to do that. I don't seem to be able to write to a regime.
Is this a trend that that Almost Blue is on this album after being the title to the last album, and you have a song called Imperial Bedroom, which is not on this album?
It's my tribute to the Doors. No, they did that, no one's. No, there's no trend to it. In fact, Imperial Bedroom, a version of Imperial Bedroom, the song was in fact written for Frida from ABBA, I sent them 3 songs this year. She's doing a solo album with Phil Collins, and I asked for some songs, and I sent them 3 very different songs, and they turned them all down. They just didn't seem to fit into the kind of record they were making. And Imperial Bedroom was the last of them. I sent a sort of Euro waltz version that I did on my own with synthesizers and a Linn drum machine. It's in fact the B-side of our next English single. It's credited to Napoleon Dynamite and the Royal Guard. That's my latest pseudonym, and which is after the last one, which was Emotional Toothpaste.
This album, Imperial Bedroom, had a different working title, didn't it?
Yeah, the original title was "This Is a Revolution of the Mind." That was, which is a quote from King Heroin by James Brown, and I just thought it was a really good, I don't know whether you know that track, but he says, "This is a revolution of the mind. Get your mind together and get away from drugs. This is a man." And I think that's but I think it was maybe a bit of an obscure idea, and the title "This is a Revolution of the Mind" does sound like a little bit like a Moody Blues album title, so we decided to change it. Nearly all of our albums have had different titles, some of which were better. Armed Forces was going to be called Emotional Fascism, but CBS said there was no way you could promote an album called that, so we had to amend it. And in fact, Imperial Bedroom was also going to be called P.S. I Love You at one point, but there was a record coming out at the same time called that, a compilation of slushy love songs, so we decided we didn't want to risk the confusion.
You're talking really about critics, and they like the earlier stuff, and they have these preconceptions going in sometimes. Do you feel that you've been sort of dogged by preconceptions in your...
Yeah, so I think preconceptions have been a bit of a trial for us in maybe if we'd just done the same thing for 4 albums, like so many American groups seem to do quite successfully, perhaps this wouldn't have been a problem if I'd settled on a style originally that I wanted to pursue. But if you do change from album to album, I think there was as much. I tend to lump the first 3 albums together, only because I had more of a change of heart after that, personally speaking. But I think each of the records that we've made has been different, and I've always been a little bit frustrated and sometimes dismayed at how the preconceptions have tended to just smear everything all into one. But I thought there was quite considerable difference between our first and second album, let alone the first, second, third, and then fourth. So the Angry Young Man thing, which I mentioned before, where it makes good copy. I mean, it's better than saying, oh yes, well he gets up and does the gardening and goes down to the supermarket. Angry Young Man thing it looks attractive but also it fulfills sort of a rock and roll myth that doesn't exist, and it's based on something that's very insubstantial and is a very passing thing, and they try to turn it into a complete art form. When I wasn't.
Surely there is something you're angry about.
Sure there is, yeah, but it's the idea of being an angry young man. It's sort of walking around with an angry young man, on your head all the time, or on your back. It would be more appropriate.
But you did work that myth. You did in some ways create the myth, though. You can't say that there wasn't.
I think the nervousness and fear of exploitation tended to put up a shield around us, and anti-press and exploitation from photographers and stuff that we wanted to avoid, and idiotic press stunts and radio stunts and record company stunts that we tried to avoid, because I thought it devalued the impact of what we were trying to do. And it's only when you actually wait for 5 years that you get to do things your way, rather than having to conform.
And are you doing them your way now?
Well, I'm talking here now with my voice. I mean, if I say something stupid now, it's my own fault.
Do you think you've gotten better as a musician and a songwriter? I mean, can you see a real evolution, say, in the last 5 years? Where you think you step back and say, it would have been much harder back then, but now I can do it?
I don't think I'm very much better musician, technically speaking. I can't notice any discernible improvement. Maybe I can tune up a little bit better now. I don't really regard myself as very much as an instrumentalist. One review once referred to my guitar playing as a composer's guitar. I think a polite way of saying it was awful. And I suppose, well, I set myself different tasks with songwriting, so it's not so much a question of improvement as a change. So I don't know whether it's an improvement to people that are sentimentally attached to the early records that we made, the same way as anybody's first records. People always get very dewy-eyed about them. When you actually play them, you can find as much fault with those records as you could with the new one. It's just a question of how you stand and what part it played in your life. If it was particularly, if the Temptations, I don't know, I Wish It Would Rain was a very important record to you, then Papa Was a Rolling Stone probably isn't going to be quite so good to you, but it's only a question of your own, it's in the eye of the beholder, is what I'm trying to say.
It's only in the last few albums that you have, maybe it's just because you're having fun done one song where you've played all the instruments on it?
Yeah, well, it usually comes about by accident. There's no conscious effort to do that. On Get Happy, I did it in New Amsterdam in a $10, I'll convert for the American viewers, in a $10 an hour demo studio. And it was just acoustic guitar and a very out of tune fretless bass and some vibes and a horrible little cheap synthesizer they had. And it just sort of worked, it gelled, and we tried to record it and tried to learn it with the attractions, but it never sort of sounded, it had a sort of unique sound, whether or not you like it or not. But it was very hard to reproduce and sort of improve on that idea. It was a question of, was there a better arrangement than that? And there didn't seem to be. The song just seemed to be worked that way, so we used that take. On Trust, Big Sister's Clothes was a song called Big Sister, which had gone through about 3 different changes of arrangement, and none of which we were totally happy with. And we had a sort of up-tempo version of a song called Big Sister, which was sort of modified lyrics, which in fact came out on a B-side in England because we found it in the can and said, this is quite good. In fact, it's better than some of the tracks on Trust. But I still wanted that song on the album very much, a lot of the lyrics, so I rewrote the song. But it was literally after we'd finished the album, so I just did it one night on my own. It was no particular big thing, this is my solo project, it's not like that. It's just how it worked out. And on the new album, we didn't limit ourselves to just the instruments that we normally play. We did try and use a few other instruments, and rather than compromising, and like on Trust we were going to put horns on a song called Watch Your Step, and then Nick Lowe said, oh no, we won't bother, so I put melodica on instead, which is sort of a bit of a compromise, because we were into this thing of just having it very, very simple. On this record we went, Steve wrote orchestrations where we thought it appropriate, and he did 2 full orchestrations of 2 of the songs, which are exciting to do. And we just used other funny instruments that we'd not tried before, rather than just using a synthesizer to kind of imitate them. We did get an actual harpsichord in, and we used vibraphones and things like that. And I stayed late one night and put vibraphones and glockenspiels and played the organ on Kid About It. And yet one day when I was out of the studio for a minute, Steve put a guitar on the end of Tears for Bedtime without telling me. And things like that, we just had, we didn't sort of set so many rules for ourselves. We left a few more sort of options open this time.
You seem to have an accordion sound on Long Honeymoon.
That's quite an amusing task. Steve played the accordion on that, but none of us could play accordion properly, so he's sitting with the accordion like this, trying to hold it under his chin and pull the squeezy bit back and forward like this, because if you pull an accordion out like that, it just keeps going, And so I think that took longer than the whole track put together.
A question on Nick Lowe's influence on the albums, as far as his ear and your ear. I mean, could you kind of pick out how he influenced those early albums? What would you see there?
Well, I think on the first 2 records, at least, I knew nothing about studios. I think Nick's influence. I don't think he really, on the first record. I mean, he admits now that I don't think he really thought I was up to much at first. I think he just thought it was a bit of a weirdo. And we had a really tight professional backing group on the first album of American musicians who could just learn the songs as I taught them to them, and then came in and Nick said, oh yes, another one of those punks that Jake keeps bringing in, because this is at the time we were at Stiff Records, and there were a lot of strange people floating around, and Nick was like the house producer. And then as we got on with the album, it became a process gradually of me getting more confidence about my ideas, and by the time we got to the second album, then we'd formed the Attractions, which was a proper group. I started to say, no, I disagree. and could actually explain what I wanted. And we used to not have arguments, but he'd say, oh, and sort of humour these crazy ideas that I had, which probably weren't crazy, but they were just at odds with something he'd do. By the time I got to the third album, it became more and more. And it just became more of him giving in, really, and letting me try things. He was very tolerant with letting me exhaust the ideas until I proved to myself it worked. Or suddenly he saw the light about what idea I had, because we didn't all see eye to eye, particularly on overdubs, because he's not a big fan of overdubs. And, you know, sometimes I'd get a bit carried away with them.
Were you and Nick working together what the song Two Little Hitlers was about?
No, it's not actually. No, the song Two Little Hitlers, the second album was going to be called Little Hitler because there was all this angry young man sort of publicity, and that was
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Excuse me.
You want to change it?
Are you on? Or we
Just
just-
cut away.
Last night when you actually made the intro fairly clear to people, it was, you know.
Yeah, I mumbled it a bit the night before.
Well, because no people here know about it, and you can assume that they'll understand what you're talking about. I don't know how to couch the question, actually. If you want to just give an explanation of perhaps why you didn't come back here and tour for a while, and why you had a fairly inflammatory press conference in New York.
When we were recording Imperial Bedroom, there was we were in Air Studios in London, and Paul McCartney was in the next studio, and he had Michael Jackson come in to do a vocal, I think, for his next record, and Bruce, the bass player in the Attractions, was down listening to some playbacks and that, and everything was going on very smoothly until somebody introduced Bruce as the bass player in the Attractions, and things turned very ugly. And it brought home once again to me that a lot of people in America had got a very, very bad impression of me from an incident that occurred during the Armed Forces tour, where it's pointless to say anything other than that we were incredibly drunk in a bar, got into a fight with some nameless American musicians, and in the course of trying to outrage them, I said some things which have been, I think, quite widely reported as being racial slurs, the phrase they usually use. And it's been very difficult for me to find a platform for an apology and an explanation. I had a very, very uncomfortable, very unpleasant press conference in New York, which was perhaps too emotional, too close to the event to make it really effective, and to an extent, I think, possibly through my own fault, the impression was that I wasn't perhaps abject enough in my apology for the likes of the Village Voice and the other pseudo-liberals in New York. So, you know, they can just go back to their little lofts and listen to Sandinista, and feed off their consciences that way. That meant that we came off the road for 18 months. There was no point in coming back to America. I felt uncomfortable. There was a lot of very negative reaction on radio stations taking our records off the playlist, and there were, God knows, precious few of those anyway. There seemed very little point. There were actual threats, you know, against my life, which, whether or not you want to take them seriously, obviously play in the back of your mind, don't make working very comfortable. And it seemed that, the overall thing was perhaps symptomatic of a bad period of time. And I think we went back to England and worked harder on, I would say, trying to make more obviously compassionate records with more heart and soul in them than we had before. And there's no words to kind of really express. Apologies are always going to sound empty. I think there was a conscious effort to maybe incorporate more elements of rhythm and blues into the music, to demonstrate our allegiance in a sense. I think that was quite conscious, really. And I think it just depressed me quite greatly that as recently as last December, when we were recording the album, that this this preconception of me as a kind of racist was still held by somebody who I really admire, and it would stop me from being able to go up to the man and telling him how much I admire his work. It's a very depressing situation, and one I hope I can overcome now.
Well, the audiences thus far on the tour.
Yeah, I don't think the audience. When we came back 18 months, when we came back a year ago, there was no indication in the audience that there was any belief that it was true. But it's a very hard thing to get over, because things like that get blown up and sensationalized, and you get people saying, "Oh yeah, don't send him back," and I suppose it's understandable, that kind of thing happened. I don't hold any malice towards people that maybe got overexcited and printed those.
The whole tour, the angry image was almost consuming the music. And
it was consuming me. The angry image on the Armed Forces tour was actually consuming me. And I said that the whole outburst there was not directed towards any particular people. Definitely not towards the artists I'm supposed to have slurred. I don't even remember saying those things. It was really at the end of my tether, and it was the anger was consuming me quite openly, and it was definitely the time to get off the road.
Your father wrote a letter to the Village Voice, anyway, which kind of it was some sort of explanation of what your true allegiance really is.
Yeah, well, I mean, my father, I think, had every right to stand up for me if he felt that I was, a few people, a few friends, and a few writers even that I've spoken to, and journalists, said that they figured that it became a convenient excuse that they were looking for a point to crucify us, and if a guy who I don't have a lot of time for, a guy called Fred Shields that writes for Rolling Stone, he said that they just fed themselves to the lions, and that's pretty much the way. I think that was fairly true, but I think we asked for it really, to some extent.
Was it just being on the road and just that whole pressure for establishing yourself? Is that the sort of the pressure to make you crazy? Or? Yeah,
I think to an extent. I just don't think I liked myself very much. I didn't like what we were turning into. I think, and it was in a way, it's become. It was good that we came off the road and took stock and turned and headed off in another direction. I see a very distinct break between the first 3 records and the next 4, and but the exorcism of that is now complete with Imperial Bedroom, being that we made the 2 soul records. I regard them as soul records: Get Happy and Trust, and then a sort of what I refer to as the Long Hangover, which is almost blue, and then the new record, which has got. It's a lot more considered a record, but that's the completion of the exorcism, and we can stop being miserable now.
You're very happy with the new record.
It's the end of the penance.
You're happy with the new record, right?
I'm very happy with the new record, yes, and I think that it incorporates all the best things of the group, or the best playing that the group's done. I mean, when I say the group, I mean the Attractions as individuals. Even though the drums are not to the fore, that's almost the strength that somebody, a percussionist obviously, percussionists by nature tend to be the loudest members of the group, and literally the loudest members of the group, and yet the strength to be able to play in an ensemble is quite difficult, and certainly Steve's contribution, I think critics have recognised that, and I think I hope that people that buy the record will notice the good bass playing. It's not the kind of thing that we normally play up, but I think sometimes the Attractions are the sort of unsung heroes of the records, because if they didn't play like that, there wouldn't be anything to sing to. It would be an a cappella record, which so many records made in Los Angeles might as well be, even though they've got supposedly the best musicians in the world playing here. They make such a bland noise behind supposedly good singers that the singers might as well be singing a cappella because there's no colour behind them. And of course Jeff Emmerich, he's did a marvellous job. I consciously didn't want a co-production credit on the record, because when I did the Squeeze album, I started to read, particularly over here, that I produced the record, and in fact it was very much a co-production with Roger Bashirian, who did all of the technical side. So I put it down as produced by Jeff Emmerich from an original idea, by like a film credit, so that people would recognise that Jeff was responsible for all the sounds and everything, and he did all the mixing. I just said what went where, and the arrangements, of course, were a group effort.
Just a couple more things for now. Can you talk? I know that you're a film buff, and that you see a lot of films and have done quite a few videos. Do you like doing them? Do you like coming up with concepts and?
Well, there's so many awful videos. I mean, now watching video channels and stuff, it's a great idea on paper, but it tends to show up the weakness of and the vanity of so many groups. And being about the ugliest group on the planet, I mean, we have this thing of wanting to really keep out of the picture as much as possible because it's probably detrimental. We're the only group in England, when we go on Top of the Pops, which is a sort of English equivalent, I suppose, of Solid Gold, for want of a better word. We're the only group who, when we make appearances there, our records go down the charts, you know. And we've made several videos now that haven't got shown for various reasons. You know, we had one with with smoking cigarettes and sort of scantily clad women in that the BBC thought was a little bit much for children's television. And then, you know, we always seem to pick on some idea which we think is really unusual and suits the song perfectly, but for some reason is not. It's the same kind of friction that we seem to encounter trying to get on AM playlists. You know? And we've recently made a video where we only appear in it for 15 seconds in little cameo roles, which accompanied the single "You Little Fool," which was our first single in England. And it's this little school story with a couple in it, and I play the headmaster, and Pete plays the proprietor of a cafe, and then there's a flashback sequence. It's a full movie, this one, you know. And Steve and Bruce play the husband and the surprised lover in another little cameo. And the BBC took one look at it and said, no, I'm sorry, there's not enough of the group in it, and they just want you standing there playing it, miming. They don't care how phony it looks, they just want something with the pictures of the group on it. It's a shame that you can't use more imagination. At the same time, in England at the moment, I don't know how many of these things are getting shown here, you're getting mini epics, mini sort of, you know, Death in Venice for 3 seconds, you know, sort of, and then a bit of Citizen Kane and some bloody Japanese films, and which are fine, but you know, amazingly pretentious, and I don't always think they really go with the music all that much. Perhaps all people really want is The Girl Can't Help It, you know.
When are you going to write your version of The Girl Can't Help It? Not fair. Can you do just an intro to the song before you do it so that people know what it's about?
Sure. This song that we're going to sing is another collaboration. This is a new thing, but this is the first time I've ever written words for somebody else's tune. This is a guy called Clive Langer, who's, as well as being a recording artist in his own right, is a very, very successful producer in England with Madness. He's Madness's producer, and of course they've just released about 14 hit singles in a row, and he's just produced the latest Dexys Midnight Runners record. And he gave me this tune, and we went away to Australia, and I started to write these lyrics, and he had a vague lyrical idea which he said you can use as a guideline, and having never done this before, it was a little bit difficult to have the tune, and it seemed very melancholy kind of tune. And the only thing I can say without just explaining it line by line was something that I approximately said in concert the other night, was we used to have a very long-running TV program over here called the Vietnam War, and we've had a recent spin-off series in England, and I suppose the song is something to do with that. And we've recently recorded, well, I should say Clive recorded it with a composite group, including Steve Naive and the bass player from Madness, and Robert Wyatt, who used to be in Soft Machine and Matching Mole and now is a solo artist, has recorded it, so hopefully it'll be available here sometime in the not too distant future. It's called Shipbuilding.
So